This incident occurred in 2020. The globe was in lockdown due to COVID-19, and individuals were confined to their residences. As a passionate backpacker and camper, I utilized the situation as an opportunity to visit various national parks and camp in diverse locations. One such location was a creek within Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado. Without disclosing my identity or excessive personal details, let's just say an event transpired with my employment in 2019 that somewhat tarnished my reputation, and a considerable number of individuals developed animosity towards me. I was compelled to relocate to a different apartment, acquire a new phone number, and ultimately resign from my position. The error I committed resulted in significant financial losses for many people, so the ensuing backlash was anticipated, though I was uncertain of its extent. I experienced persistent harassment from various unidentified numbers with some messages containing threats. I couldn't discern whether they originated from the same source or multiple individuals, but I entertained the possibility of one person contacting me from numerous numbers. For a period, the harassment appeared to cease, and I was relieved that people seemed to have lost interest or simply moved on. I was unemployed during this time, dedicating time to personal reflection, which further motivated my travels to different national parks. I undertook the 3-hour drive to Rocky Mountain National Park, parked my vehicle, and commenced my ascent up the trail towards the creek. I was alone, likely due to the fact that this was at the onset of the lockdown, and people were adhering strictly to the restrictions, remaining indoors. Additionally, it was still winter. A delicate layer of snow covered the ground, sufficiently firm to produce a distinct crunching sound with each step. After some time, I reached the creek, which was not frozen but flowing. It was remarkably serene, providing the much-needed respite from the pressures of my life at that juncture. I located a spot slightly off the trail to establish camp. Following the tent setup, I prepared firewood, ignited a fire, and cooked some sausages on the stove. Subsequently, I began perusing my book by the fire. After completing several chapters, darkness was descending. Thankfully, I had a headlamp. I rolled a joint and started smoking. Soon after, my phone began to buzz. Honestly, apart from my family, I don't receive many messages, so I extracted my phone from my jacket pocket and observed numerous texts from an unknown number. My heart palpitated upon realizing the harassment was resuming. The texts were from a number with a 203 area code, which I discovered belonged to Connecticut. The sender inquired, "How's your camping excursion progressing, friend?" The subsequent message stated, "It's picturesque out here." The third message read, "I comprehend your motive for coming here." My immediate response was, "Who is this?" Had they simply inquired about my camping trip, I might have assumed it was a family member. However, their messages implied they were present with me. The marijuana had already taken effect, and I was undoubtedly inebriated, which exacerbated my anxiety. I felt exceedingly paranoid and began scanning my surroundings, rising and performing a full 360-degree turn, scrutinizing every direction towards the increasingly shadowy woods. I retrieved my P365 handgun from my bag for reassurance. Typically, I extinguish a fire before retiring for the night, but my current paranoia precluded the thought of being in complete darkness. I entered the tent and reclined on my sleeping bag. I fixated on my phone, awaiting a reply to the text, which did not arrive. Minutes elapsed, and I yearned for the marijuana's effects to dissipate. With my headlamp still illuminated, I attempted to resume reading my book, but between my inebriated state and my preoccupation with the text, I was deluding myself into thinking I could concentrate. I opted to watch YouTube videos on my phone to occupy my time, feeling uneasy about sleeping just yet. I was engrossed in a murder documentary on YouTube, an intriguing choice considering the circumstances, when unexpectedly I received another text, a response to my prior query. They replied, "It no longer matters." My heart raced anew. I responded, "How did you ascertain I'm camping?" But again, there was no reply. Following this, the anxiety intensified. Was this a prank orchestrated by a friend or family member? Or was it one of the individuals who had previously harassed me? If it was the latter, how would they know my current location? That was the most disquieting aspect. I managed to occupy an hour watching videos on my phone and observed the fire's glow outside diminishing as it subsided. In winter, devoid of insect sounds, the woods are eerily silent, save for the wind on a blustery night. The instant a video concluded, the silence became overwhelming. Ordinarily, I would embrace the tranquility, but my peace was utterly shattered by these messages. Something then disrupted the silence, the unmistakable sound of human footsteps on the snow. They approached my tent, halting approximately 6 feet away. Then, the footsteps ceased. I gripped the gun firmly, prepared to disengage the safety. Suddenly, a flash emanated from outside, resembling someone briefly shining a flashlight at the tent, or capturing a photograph. My answer arrived promptly. I heard the individual depart, their footsteps gradually fading into silence. As I anticipated, my phone chimed and vibrated, and that number transmitted a photo of my tent. Accompanying the photo was a message: "Have a pleasant night's rest." I can't fully articulate it, but abruptly, I felt as though I snapped out of my remaining intoxication, and a surge of adrenaline and confidence overcame me. I unzipped the tent and discharged 2 rounds into the air. The sound of footsteps fleeing in the snow, not far off, indicated that my action had been effective in scaring the person away. However, it also disturbed me further, realizing they were likely still concealed nearby, observing. I yelled a threat into the air and retreated inside my tent. I believe it worked, as there were no further texts or sounds of footsteps. I remained awake for hours simply because the incident had completely roused me. It felt akin to consuming 3 cups of coffee. Eventually, I did drift off to sleep, and awakening to the morning sunlight was a tremendous relief. Whoever had trailed me there was unprepared for me to brandish a firearm. I certainly don't appear to be the type of individual who would possess a gun, and I know that was my inaugural use of that firearm since its purchase, and indeed my only use to date. Whoever had been texting, harassing, and evidently stalking me apparently decided to retreat upon discovering I was armed, because almost 5 years have passed and I haven't been disturbed. Still, it was a harrowing night, and I can't fathom how differently it might have unfolded if I hadn't been armed. During my upbringing, our family maintained an annual tradition of journeying to northern Michigan for a weekend in October. Our Uncle Jim possessed a 4-acre property there. The residence on the property could accommodate a large number of people, boasting 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. 2 bedrooms were designated for my cousins and siblings, with my brother and sister sharing 1 room and our 4 cousins occupying another. The remaining rooms were for our parents. My Uncle Jim has always been an avid hunter and fisherman, embarking on camping expeditions specifically for hunting throughout the country. My father has accompanied him on several camping trips despite being an animal enthusiast who would never intentionally cause harm. A significant portion of the 4 acres owned by my uncle comprised a vast expanse of forest. He delineated the property boundary by marking numerous trees with red paint. Beyond that lay forest land owned by the county. I'm uncertain of the nearest dwelling in that direction. It was likely miles away. My brother Adam, my cousins Jake and Joe, and I conceived an idea during lunch while our fathers were discussing hunting. We aspired to camp in the woods that night. Our fathers were receptive to the idea, likely influenced by their inebriated state, making them more amenable to suggestions. Our mothers were less enthusiastic but did not explicitly object. Consequently, my father and Uncle Jim escorted the 4 of us into the woods with a tent. My female cousins and sister were not part of this endeavor. It was exclusively for the boys. They guided us into the woods, and when Joey, the youngest among us, began complaining about the distance, they responded with laughter. That's characteristic of our fathers when they're together. Particularly when consuming alcohol, they relished teasing us as children. Regarding ages, I was the eldest at approximately 13. Adam and Jake were around 10, and Joe was about 9. We ventured beyond the property boundary, discovering a small clearing in the woods adorned with soft green mossy vegetation that my uncle identified as deer beds. He asserted it was ideal for a campsite and that he had utilized it previously. My father and Uncle Jim provided us with a somewhat inebriated tutorial on setting up a tent, enlisting our assistance to ensure they weren't solely responsible for the task. It was a remarkably spacious tent, sufficient for 4 individuals, especially children. Once erected, we placed our sleeping bags inside. We undertook this during daylight hours as it was demonstrably easier than attempting it at night. Following this, we returned to the house and engaged in outdoor games until dinner. During dinner, our mothers reiterated their reservations about our plan, deeming us too young to be alone in the woods. Our fathers insisted we would be safe, and I recall my father jesting that we would be close enough for them to hear our cries if something were to go awry. It wasn't until later that our fathers escorted us back into the woods to the tent. We were all equipped with flashlights and extra blankets due to the cold nighttime temperatures. I also brought a deck of Uno cards for us to play. Once we were all settled in the tent, my father and Uncle Jim departed for the house. We were abruptly alone in the woods. Honestly, we weren't as proximate to the house as one might assume. We were sufficiently deep into the woods that no light from the house was visible. We commenced playing Uno for a considerable period, perhaps half an hour. Uno is an excellent way to pass time. The tent was illuminated by our flashlights, arranged in a circle. All was enjoyable until we heard a scream in the distance. It resembled a girl's scream. We all fell silent and exchanged apprehensive glances. I then recalled that Fox's screams sound like the scream of a woman, so I informed everyone of this. I observed how frightened Joe was particularly, but my explanation calmed everyone. We resumed playing Uno. I was remarkably successful, winning nearly every round. At that point, no one had mentioned the scream again. It was likely forgotten. However, it recurred, much louder and closer this time. This time, it sounded considerably more human. We all fell silent again, and even I was unnerved. Joe appeared on the verge of tears. I instructed everyone to extinguish their flashlights. We crawled to our respective sleeping bags and sat in darkness. None of us possessed the courage to flee into the woods back to the house. It's that apprehension of running and being pursued, attracting the attention of whatever was out there with the sound of our footsteps. Somehow, concealing ourselves within a cloth tent felt like the safer alternative. So we waited in silence, whispering amongst ourselves, speculating whether it could still be a fox. I responded truthfully, admitting my uncertainty. I don't know who perceived it first, but we all sprang up and exchanged glances once more upon hearing rapid footsteps crunching the leaves, approaching the tent. Then they ceased, and there was an ear-splitting, gut-wrenching scream that sounded like a girl or woman's scream. It was directly outside the tent, and the tent began shaking vigorously. All of us commenced screaming. Jake and Jim were screaming in terror, while my brother and I were shouting phrases like, "Get out of the tent!" I unzipped the tent's entrance, and one by one, we all fled into the woods with our flashlights illuminated. The only reason we could see anything was the most on-edge moment of my life, like a life or death kind of feeling. We reached the property, screaming throughout the journey, and our entire family was already outside in response. All four of us returned safely. We recounted the screams and the tent shaking, and they were all shocked and horrified based on their reactions. Then I noticed our cousins Jamie and Christina and my sister were absent outside. I confronted my father and uncle, accusing them of dispatching one of the girls to frighten us. However, when they demonstrated that the girls were already in bed, it became evident that someone unknown to us was in the woods. Our fathers ventured into the woods armed with a couple of rifles and returned after a while, having encountered no one. The following day, we all assisted in retrieving the tent and other belongings back to the house. Predictably, that was a singular occurrence. We never camped in those woods again. In fact, we ceased playing outside after dark. What child would after such an experience? My conjecture is as valid as anyone's regarding who was outside our tent and their motives. What I'm about to relate continues to make me question the boundaries of reality. This incident involved my father and me, and even now, 2 years later, I experience chills merely recalling it. I comprehend how it may sound. If I were in your position, I might be skeptical as well. However, I assure you, every word is genuine. 2 years ago, my father and I embarked on a camping trip to a remote location deep in the countryside. We found this activity enjoyable as it offered a welcome respite from the routine of daily life. This particular place was idyllic, featuring hiking trails, zip lines, somewhat tourist-oriented. but possessing a rich history, Native American lands, you understand. The first night was flawless. Families at other campsites, campfires ablaze, children laughing, the tranquil evening one anticipates while camping. We prepared hot dogs, roasted marshmallows, consumed a few beers, and engaged in casual conversation with those around us. A typical, peaceful inaugural night. However, the second night marked a shift. The staff informed us that we were the sole occupants of the park. No other sites had been reserved. Initially, we were elated, an entire campground to ourselves. It sounded serene. We spent the day hiking, fishing, taking it leisurely. At one juncture, we listened to a suspenseful podcast while seated by the river because why not embrace the eerie ambiance? We believed we were being humorous. By the time the sun began to set, we were feeling content, slightly inebriated from the beers, fatigued in that gratifying manner after a long day outdoors. We decided to proceed to the park's information center to charge our phones and procure some snacks before nightfall. The return walk to our campsite is when the unease commenced. The woods felt altered, the air was denser, the sky possessed an unusual hue as though twilight was reluctant to depart. My father turned to me and remarked, "Doesn't this feel peculiar, as if we're in a dream?" He was correct. It did. The forest felt interminable, extending in all directions. My chest constricted. I couldn't dispel the sensation that we were not alone. We remained largely silent, continuing to walk, both of us casting glances over our shoulders as though anticipating something lurking in the trees. Back at camp, we remained close to the fire. We didn't explicitly discuss the unsettling feeling. It was unnecessary. It was as though we had tacitly agreed to maintain normalcy, pretending nothing was amiss. We roasted marshmallows, played music, even consumed some marijuana in an attempt to distract ourselves. Not the quintessential father-son bonding experience one might anticipate. But by the time the sun dipped below the horizon, our visibility was limited to the fire's immediate vicinity. That's when the unease escalated into something more profound. As we sat by the campfire roasting s'mores at approximately 9 p.m., we heard a noise. It was a resounding thud, akin to a tree falling. It originated abruptly, loud and near, reverberating through the woods from the river's direction, perhaps 100 yards away. We grabbed our flashlights, directing them towards the sound, but there was nothing. No movement, no luminous eyes, nothing. "Bigfoot!" we jested, a nervous chuckle escaping, but neither of us believed it. A few minutes elapsed, and then it recurred. Louder this time, farther off, but the identical sound, the same resonance. We shone our lights again, but the forest engulfed our beams, permitting us to discern only the trees surrounding our tent. And then the third thud, closer. That's when the apprehension intensified. Whatever it was advancing towards us as though encircling the campsite. Then, before we could even gather our thoughts, the fourth thud occurred, approximately 20 yards away, perhaps less. That's when the genuine fear and adrenaline surged. Any prior intoxication from the marijuana had dissipated. My father turned to me, his eyes wide. I observed the fear in his countenance. We decided to retreat into the tent. We hastily scrambled and tossed the remaining firewood onto the fire, hoping the flames would deter whatever was outside. Then we hurried into the tent, abandoning everything else. I dashed inside the tent and promptly dropped to the ground, lying prone. My father, moving somewhat slower, followed closely behind. As he was about to enter the tent, the loudest thud occurred, so close it felt as though the ground trembled. My father froze, gazing into the darkness. I uttered his name, capturing his attention as he stared in astonishment, then swiftly diving into the tent. He muttered, "It's standing there." "What's standing there?" I inquired. "I don't know," he replied, his voice quivering. It was like a wall of darkness. He positioned himself by the zipper while I concealed myself beneath my sleeping bag, attempting to move as silently as possible. He remained there, clutching the only weapon we possessed. A small knife, practically useless, but it was all we had. Then came this vibrational noise that remains difficult to describe to this day. It commenced softly, like a hum. But it wasn't merely sound. It permeated the air, a sensation within us, constricting our chests. I've never experienced anything comparable. My father whispered, "Do you hear that?" I couldn't respond. I simply nodded, too terrified to utter a sound, feeling as though we were being pursued. This persisted for approximately 5 minutes as we sat in silence. And then this other sound. It wasn't animalistic, nor was it human. It was this guttural, alien-like noise, as I prefer to describe it. It genuinely resembled the Demogorgon from Asterisk Stranger Things. Nothing I've ever encountered before. We remained immobile in that tent, too frightened to breathe, too frightened to move. There was this small mesh window near where I was lying, but I refused to look outside, fearing being observed, simply remaining there endeavoring to control my breathing as my father continued to sit with the knife. And that's when the most peculiar event transpired. Amidst all the chaos, we simply lost consciousness. Neither of us recalled attempting to fall asleep. My father was still clutching the knife when we awoke, lying in the tent's center. I awoke on my back in a state of panic, as though something was looming over me. My initial impulse was to retrieve my phone to check the time, but it was depleted. I requested my father to check his. It was also dead. Both had been fully charged the previous night, ensuring they were operational in case of an emergency. We exited the tent to urinate. As we stood 5 feet from the tent, urinating back to back, still terrified, we observed that it was still pitch black outside. The air was frigid and still. The food we had left on the table remained untouched. The fire we had stoked before entering the tent had burned down to ash, as though it had never been ignited. The entire area felt unsettling, as though we shouldn't have been there. We endured the remainder of the night in the tent, exchanging few words, simply attempting to obtain some genuine rest. We packed up in silence, not uttering a word until we were in the vehicle. When we finally discussed it, we realized we had both experienced the same sensation that night, watched and hunted, as though something was anticipating our vulnerability. We informed my mother upon our return. She believed we were delusional, suggesting we might have been drugged or inhaled some peculiar gas. But it wasn't that. Whatever transpired that night, it was authentic. We both underwent the identical experience. To this day, we remain uncertain of its nature. We didn't observe it, not entirely, but my father came closest. Whatever he witnessed, it wasn't human, and it wasn't natural. We've never encountered a comparable narrative. We haven't returned to that campsite since, nor have we even gone camping since. I doubt we ever will.